Columbus County, North Carolina is a very rural part of the state. The kind of place where someone could think they could cover up something that was really bad. At 9:15 p.m., 911 gets a call of a fire and the fire department responds. It appears to be an abandoned structure that's been there for maybe 50 or 60 years, and now it's destroyed. And there are objects in the building, including a mattress that is burned. A fireman sees an object he thinks could be a pumpkin. He realizes it's a human head. It has teeth and hair and eyes. House fires do not dismember bodies. This much is obvious. We're dealing with one sick individual. I spent my career closing murder cases. But I'm not the only one who answered the call. It takes a rare breed to solve the unsolvable, to catch a ruthless killer, to find justice for the dead. That's what it takes to be an American detective.
My name's Nick Deming. I'm a special agent with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. I wanted a job that wasn't routine. Law enforcement's not a routine job.
The state only hires the best people because they are looking for the best people. Deming's been a detective for 10 years and is now working for the SBI out of Jacksonville, North Carolina. I met Nick Deming. He's a great guy and he is sharp. He knows his business.
That day, I was with my coworker. I get a call about 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it's Deming.
There was body parts located in a burned barn in Columbus County, about 2 hours away. We drop everything and head their way.
Deming gets a call about this grisly scene over in Columbus County. Dismembered body parts set on fire? This is not your average assignment.
When I arrived at the scene, I remember it was still smoldering.
The sickly, sweet odor of burned flesh. The stench is a hard thing to deal with.
You treat everything really as a death investigation. You don't form the opinion of suicide, homicide right out the gate. But here in this particular case, I certainly want to treat it like a homicide.
Their arms and legs were scattered around throughout the debris.
Whoa, guys, down.
Once we moved a piece of wall, we found the second torso.
Hey, detective, you're gonna want to see this.
It took it to a different level.
Wait a minute. Now we have two victims. Dismemberment is an incredibly evil thing to do. To kill is not enough. You are so filled with hate, you want to destroy the identity of this individual. Even animals don't kill like that. Animals kill to survive. They don't do so because they enjoy it. Only humans do that.
At this point, I don't know if the victims were murdered here or dumped here.
Agent Deming is faced with a question. Did this crime occur here, or is it just dump the remains, set them on fire, and run away? Odds are very good this is a dump site, not a murder site. To control 2 living people and get them in this building is not an easy thing to do. But it's very easy if they're already dead and already dismembered.
When we arrived at the scene of the barn, we had nothing. No victim identification, and certainly no suspect.
When you arrive at a scene that's been destroyed by fire, it's frustrating because you're already behind the 8 ball and the investigation has not even begun. There's no evidence for you to find. It's already been destroyed.
We stayed on scene with investigators throughout the night and assisted with removing the body remains.
Who are these people? Where did they come from? Are they related, or are they 2 separate murders? We need to figure out what happened.
We're just here to ask you a couple questions about the house fire.
To get some answers to those thousands of questions we have,
Did you happen to see anything?
we start knocking on doors. We start trying to get a timeline of when the fire was started.
Were you home around 5:30 p.m. yesterday?
Deming tries for a canvas in this area, but there's hardly anyone that lives here. The person that saw the flames and called it in was merely a passerby. There are no surveillance cameras. This is rural North Carolina. Mother Nature is the only witness to this.
When I was at the crime scene, I overheard that 2 females were missing out of Wilmington. I was thinking that was a good distance away from where we were at in Columbus County, but it's definitely something that we wanted to follow up with.
Sunday, April 2nd, 2017, in Wilmington, North Carolina. Reverend Blevins is greeting his Sunday morning parishioners.
Eva Jo Jones and Tiffany Cartwright were there every single Sunday. On this particular Sunday, we noticed that they were not there. That for them was very unusual. On Monday morning, I had gotten a text message asking me if I had heard from Eva and Tiffany over the weekend.
We really need to check on them. We then said, well, let's just drive over to the apartment.
They find the place locked up. Eva and her daughter Tiffany have never missed a church service in years. Everything about this is alarming to them.
We went to the manager. We asked him if we could go in with him. And so he opened the door. It smelled very clean, like some type of disinfectant. We went all the way down the hall. Everything was absolutely spotless. Everything was put in perfect order. There was not a dish in the sink. There was nothing. Like they had just packed their bags and left. I just knew something wasn't right. So I called the Wilmington Police Department and reported them missing.
Wilmington PD responds to the apartment, finds the place neat and tidy. Everything here had the appearance of total normalcy. Nothing to see here, folks. And yet something here just isn't right. Where are these people? Why did they tell anybody where they were going?
So I realized that we have 2 ladies missing out of Wilmington, and we have potentially 2 human remains that were found in a barn. Due to the fire damage, our best hope was to reach out to the Wilmington PD and get the dental records to identify the human remains.
The coroner's office determines that the bodies discovered in the barn are, in fact, Tiffany Cartwright and her mother, Eva Jones. When you see a case like this where the violence is extreme, it's personal. This is not some random act by a lunatic. This perpetrator is intent on covering his tracks. Demi knows this, but no one can be careful enough to stop a good detective. Agent Deming now knows the identity of these two unfortunate souls who were discovered dismembered and burned to a crisp. No one in their hometown of Wilmington knows that yet. As far as they know, these women are still missing.
Prayer after prayer, going up tonight for Eva Jones and her daughter, Tiffany Cartwright. No one's heard from the mother and daughter since Friday. Both missed Saturday doctor appointments and Sunday service at Life Community Church. Their car gone, their phones going straight to voicemail. Now their church, that's more like family, just wants them found.
Wilmington PD is now aware of who these people are and report to Harriet at their church, the woman who reported them missing in the first place.
When I heard the bodies were dismembered, I don't think I have ever felt so sick and so, it was just an awful feeling.
Here we are in an investigation where a mother and her daughter are found brutally murdered, dismembered, and set on fire. Who would want to do them harm? Someone certainly did.
At that point, we don't know too much about them because we were kind of almost working two separate investigations until we hit that overlap. But Wilmington PD had spoken to friends from the church, people in the community.
I met Eva and Tiffany pretty soon after they came to the church. They were there every single Sunday.
Eva is 60 years old and is employed in a legal office in Wilmington. Her daughter Tiffany is 35 and is a custodian at a local elementary school. They live together in an apartment.
I did get to know both of them. Eva, particularly, she just had such a sweet spirit about her. And Tiffany, she was great. She was quieter. She served in our ministries. They both were amazing people.
Law enforcement always talks to the next of kin to figure out who else might be involved in this story. Wilmington PD told me that they had spoken to Eva Jo Jones's other daughter, Sarah.
Sarah has now moved out of state after separating from her husband and now lives in Ohio.
On that Thursday during the day, Sarah made her trek from Ohio in her car to Wilmington, and she came straight to the church.
Wilmington PD met Sarah at the church and informed her that her mother and her sister were deceased.
To the police's credit, they didn't want her to be alone at that moment. And so we met at our church and they shared the tragic news with her. And it was a moment. I hope I never have to sit in a moment like that again.
Watching a human being absorb that kind of news, it was traumatic to me. I can't imagine how traumatic it was for Sarah. Just what do you do with all that pain? Or where do you put all of that?
Sarah is, of course, devastated by this news. They inquire of Sarah who might want to do them harm.
Any issues with anybody?
Sarah says no one. They're the nicest people in the world. The usual story. No one has threatened them in any way, nor are there any difficulties with anyone.
I knew, based off the dismembered bodies, that this is going to be some linked to a crime of passion. It's going to be linked to a potential anger, sadness, all sorts of emotions that just built up.
Affairs of the heart produce emotions like nothing else. People get really distressed when they believe they're being rejected. This produces rage, and rage becomes revenge, and revenge becomes murder. Who are they romantically involved with? How did that come to an end? Did somebody monkey with somebody else's monkey? That's always a problem. Eva is 60 years old, but she is single. They asked, does she date people? And they say, no, not recently. Okay, what about her daughter, Tiffany? Well, she has an ex-boyfriend. They broke up. Oh, really? Their friends know him as Ben Chapman. They dated for a period of time, and now they don't anymore. No one knows much more about them than that. But it's a name, and it gives Deming a place to go.
Thank you for meeting with us.
Who are you, Ben? And what do you have to do with this, if anything?
I've seen it in my training and had experienced that a lot of times it's a breakup with a girlfriend. Could be that thing that triggers that person to take a life.
Deming is considering how to approach Ben and identifying where he's currently located when he's contacted by the coroner's office with the results of the autopsy.
The medical examiner's report came out, and the findings were horrific. You got blunt force trauma, dismembered bodies, removal of the limbs, and decapitation. This is some dark stuff.
What's the cause of death? Well, take your pick. There's probably 20 causes of death in there. These people weren't just dismembered, they were tortured. The hate that this person feels never dissipates during this entire process. He's having the time of his life killing these people.
A lot of times a straw that breaks the camel's back could be learning of infidelity, somebody leaving, a partner, betrayal could play a big factor in there.
Ben is an ex-boyfriend. How did he become an ex-boyfriend? A transgression by him or a transgression by Tiffany? Police like ex-boyfriends. They do stupid things. I've seen death by every means except a nuclear weapon. Is this the worst murder I know about? It's certainly in the top 10. I've had worse, but not many. In this case, we're talking about the dismemberment of 2 women and set on fire. Could it be that Tiffany's ex-boyfriend, Ben Chapman, be the person who did that? He's certainly worthy of further inquiry. They find nothing about him to be suspicious in any way. All his friends and associates say that he is a wonderful person.
In a lot of cases, the ex-boyfriend or girlfriend can be a great source of information, but in this case, it wasn't a help.
When you're looking for someone that has this level of violence in them, you assume that they have an extensive criminal record. Ben Chapman doesn't have one. His demeanor does not match someone who is capable of doing what was done to these 2 women. Ben Chapman didn't do this. Someone else did. At this point, we're spinning our wheels somewhat. They haven't even established the location of the crime scene yet. They know where body parts were dumped, but that's not where these murders took place.
We always want to find the scene of the crime. That way we can locate more evidence. That way we can help determine through that evidence who was there maybe even who wasn't there.
So the scene is still out there, and Deming knows it. Where is it? It's likely it's their apartment, despite what the police say they observed when they were in there. So let's go back and look again.
Detectives go back to the apartment to see if anything's there that they might have missed. They locate Eva's purse and phone.
Now that's interesting. Just one victim's phone was discovered in their apartment, Eva's. But where is Tiffany's? Deming needs to figure that out, and fast.
Cell phone records are great because the cell phone provider will give us the location of where the cell phone was last used.
So while they wait for answers from the cell phone company, the investigators carry out a full forensic workup of the victim's apartment. There's a factor involved in physical evidence of a violent crime. It's called blood. Blood has a habit of showing up in the darndest places, even after time.
Crime scene investigators are highly trained individuals. They got more chemicals, they have these fancy lights, they have all sorts of equipment that can help them develop leads and collect evidence at a crime scene a normal cop couldn't gather.
Blood is a curious thing. It's a viscous liquid. It's not like water. It's thick. And eventually it's going to seep back to the surface. On this occasion, they see something they didn't see 3 days ago. Now they see a faded crimson stain on the carpet. They block all the windows. They hose the place down with luminol. And it lights up. There is blood everywhere. Blood in the bathtub, blood in the bathroom. Blood in the carpet.
Finding this amount of blood tells us that somebody could have been killed in this apartment. Today's technology with DNA, if there's a large loss of blood, it's going to be extremely hard to get rid of it all. So you're trying to figure out what else isn't here that should be here. There's hacksaw marks on the bathtub, and that could have played a role in how the bodies were dismembered. There was a brand new shower curtain placed in the bathroom, which by itself isn't necessarily anything. But when you start combining all these other factors, it's pretty significant. At this point in the investigation, with no signs of forced entry, it's somebody that had access that they willingly let into the house.
So now we're getting somewhere at last. Deming now needs Tiffany's cell phone records back, because they're the next piece of this puzzle.
Great, thanks.
Location data can tell you a great deal about a cell phone. In the case of Eva Jones, the last location ping on her phone was on the doorknob in her apartment. She didn't go anywhere. In the case of her daughter, Tiffany, when they get those results back, it's a total mystery.
We learned through investigation at Wilmington PD that Tiffany's last ping was in Myrtle Beach.
So what is Tiffany's phone doing in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina? We need to go back to the victim's relatives and friends to find out what connection, if any, they had to that location.
We knew that Sarah, Eva's other daughter, had lived in the Myrtle Beach, South Carolina area.
So Wilmington police talked to Sarah to figure out who else might be involved in this story.
You were married for about 2 years.
One of the persons she mentioned was her estranged husband, Jeffrey.
Sarah, the surviving daughter, is going through a divorce with her husband, with whom she had 2 kids. The husband's name is Jeffrey Harmon.
Got divorced recently.
Sarah has left Jeffrey and is currently living in Ohio.
Wanted to stay together, be a family. I didn't.
She says Jeffrey is hoping they'll get back together, but she has no plans to reconcile with him.
Everybody who's in Eva and Tiffany's sphere of influence is in Wilmington except for one, Jeffrey Harmon, who lived in Myrtle Beach.
Well, Jeffrey, that's a bit of a problem now, isn't it? Tiffany's phone is pinging in your city. There's a moment in every case when something happens that is the key to something. You feel a sense of calmness come over you because the tension has left you. This is it. This is what we need. The last cell phone location ping on Tiffany's phone was in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Now who lives in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina? Well, Jeffrey Harmon does. The estranged husband of Tiffany's sister, Sarah. Sarah says Jeffrey says he loves her and wants her to return to the family home. He seems to get along fine with his mother-in-law and his sister-in-law.
Jeffrey was a even-keel man who volunteered with the Boy Scouts and was known to be relatively quiet.
All right. All right, thank you.
We weren't able to locate anything significant between them through domestic violence or anything of that nature.
Following the murders, the investigators had reached out to Jeffrey to tell him what had happened to his in-laws.
Wilmington spoke to Jeffrey Harmon. He said he hadn't seen Tiffany or Eva since Christmas and he had no plans to see them.
When Wilmington PD spoke to Jeffrey Harmon, he told them his mother-in-law and sister-in-law did not want to be involved in their marital problems.
When police talked to Sarah, she gave them the same story.
So that account is all confirmed. But surprise, surprise, it's not the entire story because it never is. Harriet Blevins, the wife of the minister, recalled something important.
I knew about Sarah and her husband's troubles because Eva would confide in me and others at the church to pray for Sarah. She was always very concerned for Sarah and for her children. And that she did not think that Jeff Harmon was a good guy. And she did not think he was good to Sarah. I think that Tiffany also was not happy that her sister was married to such a man.
Let's run him through the system. Find out where he lives. Well, Jeffrey, Tiffany's phone is pinging close to where you reside.
It started to click, and we at that point knew that one of the phones was down there at his residence. And it was a bold-faced lie. He said he didn't see him since Christmas.
I always loved it when people lied to me. Tell me a lie. Because if you lie to me, I'm talking to the right fellow. Now we have to go confront Mr. Harmon, go see him, and look him in the eye.
I'm Sergeant Jamie Jernigan. I formerly worked with the Ord County Police Department as an investigative detective in the homicide unit. April 4th, 2017, the Criminal Investigation Unit receives the call from Wilmington PD to send out a detective to an address out on Leo Drive in Myrtle Beach. The detective attempts to make contact by knocking on the door. He checked the windows, he looked around, he didn't see anyone.
So where's Jeffrey? Is he hiding? Is he just at work? Interesting.
So he took his business card, put it in the door.
They left the business card for a reason. They want Harmon to know they were there. They want to see if it hinks him up at all.
I was at home, asleep after working a long day, and I'd hear the phone ring around 2 a.m. The 2 a.m. phone call's never good. It's Ord County Police Department.
Deming was on the phone with the Horry County Police Department in South Carolina. They reported they received a phone call from Jeffrey Harmon's friend.
We knew we had a problem.
The Horry County Police Department in South Carolina received a call from Jeffrey's friend, who was in Jeffrey's home. He said Jeffrey called him in a panic, so he headed over to the house. He went inside. As he approached the bathroom door, he heard a gunshot.
I arrived on scene and was immediately met by initial responding officers.
Jeffrey apparently realized the police were closing in. He did not want to face them.
There was a male subject who was found deceased in the bathtub, fully clothed, from what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. With the evidence that was collected at the scene, we were able to conclude that there was no foul play, that it was in fact a suicide.
So he takes the coward's way out. He eats his gun. Now they have to obtain all the corroborating evidence, so the investigation continues.
Yes, 122.
We found the victim's jewelry in the neighbor's trash can, and victim's cell phones, multiple handguns, multiple boxes of ammunition, a notebook that was recovered that actually did contain a suicide note. And we took Jeffrey Harmon's pickup truck from the location. I believe it was a Dodge truck.
Detectives now have a good idea on how this crime took place. They don't have a perfect idea because they weren't there. The evidence would show that Sarah leaves Jeffrey, and he doesn't take that well.
Sarah told me that the relationship with her and Jeffrey was very strained. She described it as miserable, but that there was never any violence or any addiction to drugs or anything like that, just that it was an unhealthy, difficult relationship that she was looking to get out of.
Sarah left her husband, Jeffrey Harmon. Jeffrey Harmon decided it's best for vengeance to lash out at her loved ones.
Jeffrey Harmon has a psychopathic episode and decides he will torture his wife by butchering her mother and her sister. What his motivation for that is, who knows? I'm not crazy, so I don't know.
March 31st, he purchased some duct tape. Buying duct tape just sounds like there was some forethought and planning to what he was about to do. He drives his truck to the women's Wilmington apartment.
We went over this again. I don't want you here.
Eva Jones doesn't know what his intention is that day.
I told her we don't want anything more to do.
I just want to talk.
As there's no signs of forced entry,
I just want to talk.
Okay, come in.
it's believed that Lt.Joe Jones let Jeffrey Harmon into their home.
Detectives believe she lets him into her apartment, and he attacks and kills her. Drags her into the bathroom, into the bathtub, and chops her up, for God's sake. He can't get enough blood on him. That's how psychotic he is at this particular moment. He is out of contact with reality. Detectives believe Jeffrey then waits for the daughter Tiffany to come home. They find photos in Jeffrey's phone of Tiffany tied up and duct taped and kidnapped for a period of time.
Harmon kidnaps Tiffany and drives her back 200 miles to his residence in Myrtle Beach.
Eventually, he kills Tiffany as well and dismembers her.
Tiffany and Eva were missing for 3 days. Evidence is still unsure where Tiffany was killed or where her mother's remains were held during this time. But what we know, he takes the remains to an abandoned barn and sets the barn on fire.
He then proceeds to try to cover up what he's done. Clean up the apartment, vacuum the blood out of the entry hall. All the different tricks that he thinks will absolve him of guilt in this matter. He returns home. He thinks he has a plan. It comes unraveled when detectives close in. When panic sets in, your worst enemy is your mind. He can't face that. He's a tough guy when he's faced with two small women he can overcome. But he's not truly a tough guy. He's just a nutcase. So now he chooses self-destruction over punishment.
He called a friend. Jeffrey locked himself in the bathroom and laid in the bathtub and shot himself in the head.
So long, Jeffrey. The world's a better place without people like you.
Investigation has shown he acted alone in doing this. In this case, case closed by death of offender.
You can't prosecute a dead guy, so the case is closed. Without question, this is sick. Jeffrey Harmon is one sick little boy.
Six years later, we are still grappling with the fact that something like that could happen here within our community and, you know, our family, basically. It's just astounding. I think if I could talk to the kids or to Sarah today, you know, that I would just really reiterate to them how much Eva and Tiffany love Sarah and those kids.
I would say that this is one of the worst I've worked. I learned some lessons from this case. Don't overlook anybody just because they're not wearing all black and a ski mask. You know, they could easily be the guy next to you in the store. Jeffrey was known as an even-keeled Boy Scout leader, mild-mannered guy, and he was our guy.
Sarah met the wrong guy. And Eva Jones and Tiffany Cartwright died in the worst possible way as a result. Good police work nailed Jeffrey Harmon in the end. Did Jeffrey Harmon look like a murderer? No. Is he a monster? Yes. And he acted out being precisely that. A seemingly mild-mannered guy who was anything but trust no one. This case is an indication of that. Trust no one. On the next American Detective. This is the type of tip that convinces you that there is a God.
They ended up excavating what appeared to be a fresh grave site.
I haven't seen her since we dropped her off Virgin Grave.
But 6 pounds of pressure, that's how much pressure it takes to pull a trigger.
The harrowing discovery of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee in their Arlington, Texas, home remains a scar upon the community, a brutal inversion of the peaceful, industrious life they had built after migrating from Vietnam. As a journalist who has long observed the German ethos, a culture that deeply values communal solidarity, the quiet dignity of hard work, and an inherent respect for the sanctity of the domestic sphere, I find Betrayal of this elderly couple not merely a criminal act, but a profound assault on the human spirit. Their journey, intended to secure a legacy for their children through an honest garment business, was derailed by the desperate intersection of financial misfortune and the shadow of exploitation. When their dream faltered, they sought comfort in traditions that, while meant to provide protection, rendered them vulnerable to the predatory machinations of Daphne Wright, a self-styled spiritual advisor whose greed eclipsed all morality. The internal landscape of this tragedy is as disturbing as the physical scene. Long and Hong, caught in the vice grip of a mounting debt that swelled to nearly $280,000, found themselves ensnared by a woman who weaponized their cultural beliefs. For Daphne Wright, these vulnerable immigrants were not human beings seeking solace, but resources to be liquidated through life insurance policies. The perpetrators, Bobby and Willie Guillory, were similarly caught in a cycle of desperation, manipulated by the promise of financial gain to commit an act of unthinkable violence. Their participation highlights the corrosive power of greed, which can transform ordinary individuals into instruments of cold-blooded murder. The elderly couple, meanwhile, face their final moments in a state of terror, their voices silenced by duct tape, their lives extinguished in a closet that was meant to be a place of private repose, not a tomb. The investigation into this cold-blooded crime uncovered a meticulously staged scene intended to blame local Vietnamese gangs, a cynical attempt to exploit existing societal prejudices to deflect justice. Yet, the very perfection of the staging eventually proved to be its undoing. The subsequent journey to conviction, spanning years of painstaking detective work, the emergence of DNA evidence from a discarded marijuana cigarette, and the uncomfortable reliance on the testimony of the couple's son-in-law, Chow Tran, reveals the complexities of a system that must sometimes negotiate with compromised witnesses to ensure the primary predator, Daphne Wright, is removed from society, while Wright serves a life sentence. The lingering question of Chow Tran's full culpability weighs heavily on those who sought justice, serving as a somber reminder that the pursuit of truth is often a fractured, imperfect endeavor. Ultimately, the story of Long and Hong is a testament to the resilience of a community that continues to honor their memory, even as it struggles to reconcile the darkness that shattered the quiet dignity of 2 lives lived with humble, industrious purpose. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for reasons so absurd, so utterly shallow, that they defy any rational explanation. My. You would think that after 30 years of staring into the abyss of the human heart, nothing could surprise me anymore. But then, you stumble across a case like this, and you realize that some people do not just walk through the darkness, they build their entire lives inside of it. I tell you, there is a special place in the cold, hard reality of homicide investigation for those who wear a mask of affection while holding a knife behind their back. Bernie James was a man who understood the weight of life. He was a Marine, a firefighter, a man who had stared death in the face and decided, in his own way, to spend his remaining time protecting others. He had already lost his first wife to an aneurysm, leaving him to raise 3 young children alone. He was vulnerable. He was grieving. And into that void stepped a woman named Patty. You have to be kidding me. But she convinced him she was the answer to his prayers. She became a mother to his children, and for a while, it seemed like the pieces had finally fit together. But look closer, and you see the cracks in the foundation. Patty was a woman defined by a deep, physical scar from her youth, a mark she wore like a banner of victimhood. She convinced herself that because she was scarred on the outside, she was entitled to be cruel on the inside. She played the part of the devoted wife, but at night, behind the closed doors of their home, the house would erupt in screaming matches. It was not a marriage. It was a theater of war where Bernie was a designated casualty. When we found Bernie, he was in the front seat of his vehicle, his life extinguished by a coward. It was a blunt force trauma to the right side of the head, followed by the cold, calculated act of strangulation. And here is where it gets interesting. The scene was a stage. The oil cans were out, the wallet was rifled through to look like a robbery, but the execution was sloppy. A professional thief does not leave an ID behind. A criminal in a hurry does not inventory a wallet on the driveway. Patty spun us a story about a mysterious black man, a stranger with a French accent, looking for matches. It was a fiction, a fairy tale told by someone who thought she was the smartest person in the room. But detectives do not deal in fairy tales. We deal in physical evidence. We found no blood in that car consistent with the massive head trauma he sustained. That told us one thing. He was killed elsewhere, and he was brought to the car to be dumped. When we pushed, the walls began to crumble. Patty led us to a man named Timot. And what a tangled web she wove. She was not just Patricia James. She was a ghost. She had invented a personality named Demi to meet Tim, and another named TJ, an imaginary flight attendant, just to manipulate the people around her. It was a masterclass in deception. She used these personas to poison Tim's mind, convincing him that Bernie was a child molester and an abuser. She fed Tim's ego and his delusions until he was willing to do the dirty work for her. Think about the sheer audacity of that. She sat there, a mother of 3, orchestrating the murder of her husband, poisoning the minds of those around her, all while calculating the payout from his life insurance. She had effectively written her children out of the benefits, leaving herself as the sole survivor. When she finally realized the game was up, she did not confess. She performed. She shifted into her last line of defense, the "I do not remember" routine. She tried to claim she had a split personality, that it was TJ who did it, not her. It is pathetic, really. You look at a woman like that, and you see a void where a soul should be. She treated her children like pawns, scamming churches by pretending her own son was deaf just to line her pockets. She isolated those kids, kept them from their own family, and made them prisoners in their own home. It is a level of manipulation that makes your skin crawl. In the end, the truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep you bury it. Timot took a plea, and the jury eventually saw through performance. Patty James was convicted of first-degree murder and sent to spend the rest of her life behind bars, where she belongs. She destroyed a family. She broke the heart of a man who only wanted to be loved. And she left behind children who had to grow up realizing their new mother was a monster in disguise. People always ask me if I believe in evil. I tell them, look at the choices people make. When you choose to discard a human life like a piece of trash, when you have no remorse, no conscience, and only an insatiable hunger for your own gain, well, what else do you call it? That is evil, plain and simple. And it is the one thing that never, ever changes. Human beings are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can imagine. Greed, lust, a simple desire to be rid of someone who has become an inconvenience in their pathetic little lives. You look at a man like Danny Coleman, a good man, a decent man, And you wonder how he never saw the darkness sitting right across the dinner table from him. My. It makes you realize that the person you share your bed with might just be the person sharpening the knife behind your back. I tell you, it is a bitter pill to swallow. Stanton, Missouri, is nothing but rolling farmland, woods, and fields. It is quiet, too quiet. On a night in October 1992, a passerby sees a fire in a field. Not a campfire, not a trash fire, but a vehicle. By the time the fire department gets there, it is a funeral pyre. The body inside was so badly burned that identification was a nightmare. All that remained were skeletal remains, a gold chain, a ring, a watch, and a metal rod in the right leg. You have to be kidding me. A metal rod from a motorcycle accident years before. That was the only thing standing between Danny Coleman and being just another John Doe in a nameless grave. We started from the inside and worked our way out. Danny was a family man, a guy who taught kids how to handle firearms, a guy with a big heart. He was a mechanical engineer, a hard worker who was doing well for himself. Then you look at his wife, Karen. She told us they were a happy couple. She looked us in the eye and lied through her teeth. I tell you, people will lie to you even when the truth is screaming to be heard. We found no enemies. No one had an axe to grind. But someone had put a bullet in his head. The medical examiner found the truth in the bone fragments. A lead snowstorm caused by a firearm, and then burned his truck to hide the evidence. It was cold. It was calculated. It was purely evil. The case stalled. It sat in a file cabinet for years, gathering dust while the truth waited in a prison cell. Then, a deathbed confession from a man named Larry Nolan blew the floodgates wide open. Nolan, a career criminal, was in love with Karen, or so he thought. She played him like a cheap fiddle. She seduced him during prison visits and convinced him to have her husband killed for a $50,000 insurance policy. It was a conspiracy of greed. Karen was living a double life, drugs, affairs, and a cold-hearted plot to cash in on her husband's life. She promised $15,000 to Nolan, and he hired James Cornhart and Stephen Mueller to do the dirty work. These men were just hired guns, willing to snuff out a life for a pocketful of change. They didn't know Danny, and they didn't care. They lured him to a house, beat him, and shot him dead. When we finally put the cuffs on Cornhart, we found his fingerprint on a matchbook wrapper at the scene. 16 years it had been sitting in an evidence locker. Science has a way of catching up to people who think they are smarter than the law. Then came the recorded jailhouse calls, where Cornhart talked his friend about dumping the murder weapon and a homemade silencer into a river. The web of lies finally collapsed. Karen Coleman wanted a new life, and she was willing to trade her husband's blood to get it. When the walls closed in, she turned on her co-conspirators, hoping for a lighter sentence. She got 20 years. 20 years for orchestrating the murder of the man she had been married to for 19 years. I was very disappointed in that. I thought she should have gotten life, too. She was a murderer in every way that counts. Danny Coleman never saw it coming. He was totally blindsided, and that is what hurts the most. He was an asset to this world, a genuinely good soul, and his life was bought and sold like a piece of meat by the person who was supposed to protect him. You look at the cruelty of it, the utter lack of humanity, and you have to ask yourself, what is a human life worth to a monster? To Karen, it was just $50,000. May we never be so blind as to let the wolves into our own homes. As a seasoned investigator who has seen the absolute worst of human nature, I have to ask, in your view, is it the inherent greed of the perpetrator that is most disturbing, or the calculated betrayal of a loved one that makes a case like this so difficult to process? And physical abuse. Investigators and family members vehemently rejected these claims, characterizing Steve as a gentle soul. Authorities concluded that Lana, utilizing her medical knowledge as a nurse, had methodically poisoned Steve over several days, fully aware of the lethal consequences. Following a failed suicide attempt upon learning of the impending investigation, Lana was arrested and charged. In January 2020, She entered a plea of guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a drug or food product. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The case remains a chilling reminder of how a calculated betrayal, driven by the motive of financial gain, could destroy the life of a man who was the heart and soul of his family. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and lively businessman known for his booming personality and deep devotion to his family. After years of searching for a partner who matched his intellectual and emotional depth, he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years a junior, in late 2009. Although Lana was quiet and reserved, a stark contrast to Steve's vibrant energy, he fell head over heels, viewing her as the missing piece of his life. The couple married in November 2013 and eventually settled into a picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina, where they enjoyed a seemingly happy life, surrounded by family and their beloved dogs. However, their idyllic life took a dark turn in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious, recurring bouts of dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. After a brief period of apparent recovery, tragedy struck on July 21, 2018, when Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initial investigation suggested a natural death caused by a heart attack, but the Clayton family grew deeply suspicious. They were troubled by the lack of a will, Lana's rapid disposal of Steve's personal belongings, and a harrowing discovery that their master mattress was soaked with human waste, suggesting Steve had been bettered and neglected for days before he died. Urged by the family to look deeper, authorities conducted a toxicology report, which revealed lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, in Steve's system, the active ingredient found in over-the-counter eye drops. While harmless in eyes, the substance is deadly when ingested, causing central nervous system failure. Facing the evidence, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve's water with the eye drops over several days. While she claimed the act was an impulsive response to alleged verbal and physical abuse, friends and family vehemently denied these claims, describing Steve as a gentle, loving soul. Investigators concluded the motive was financial gain, as Steve's lack of will ensured his entire estate would pass to her. After a failed suicide attempt as police closed in, Lana Clayton was arrested and ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison in 2020 for voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drug items, ending the life of a man who had trusted her with everything. Would you like to know more about the specific legal arguments used during the sentencing? Or perhaps more about the forensic details of how the investigators linked the eye drops to the cause of death? Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and vibrant businessman who deeply loved his family and friends. After retiring at 41, he dedicated his life to mentoring others and enjoying his close-knit circle. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse he met in North Carolina. While Lana appeared to be a quiet and sweet partner, their marriage took a dark turn behind closed doors. In June 2018, Steve suddenly fell ill with symptoms of vertigo, dizziness, and extreme nausea. His wife, Lana, told family members that he was merely exhausted and needed bed rest. On July 21, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of the staircase in their South Carolina lakefront home. Initially, law enforcement suspected a natural death, such as a heart attack, based on Lana's account and the lack of visible trauma. However, Steve's family became immediately suspicious. They were troubled by the state of the master bedroom, where they found a urine-soaked mattress, indicating that Steve had been neglected and incapacitated for days, as well as Lana's haste in disposing of his personal belongings and her claim that he had no will. The family's persistence led to an autopsy and a toxicology report, which uncovered the horrifying truth. Steve had been methodically poisoned with tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common eye drops like Visine. Ingesting large amounts of this substance shuts down the central nervous system and leads to cardiac arrest. Confronted with the evidence, Lana admitted to investigators that she had been putting eye drops into Steve's drinks. While she claimed it was a result of alleged verbal and physical abuse, those who knew Steve, a man remembered as a gentle and kind soul, rejected her claims as a desperate attempt to manipulate the narrative. Evidence indicated that she had been poisoning him over several days and ultimately administered a fatal dose. Following a failed suicide attempt, Lana Clayton was arrested and charged with murder. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food or drug product. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. For Steve's family, the tragedy remains a deep wound. They lost a man they described as a hero and a mentor, a life stolen through a cold and calculated betrayal. Here is the seamless narrative of the Steve Clayton case in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and boisterous businessman who dedicated his life to mentoring others and supporting his close-knit family. After retiring at 41, he eventually found love with a nurse named Lana Walsh. The couple married in 2013 and moved into a picturesque home on the banks of Lake Wylie in South Carolina, where they appear to be living an idyllic life. However, the facade began to crumble in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious bouts of dizziness and nausea. Lana, utilizing her background as a nurse, cared for him at home, claiming he was suffering from vertigo. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of the staircase in their home because there were no signs of a struggle. Lana convinced authorities that his death was a natural consequence of his illness, likely a heart attack. Suspicion quickly mounted within Steve's family. They were baffled by Lana's behavior. She immediately began clearing out Steve's belongings, cremated him against his wishes, and insisted that he had left no will, an act completely out of character for a man as meticulous as Steve. Furthermore, when family members visited the home, they discovered a mattress in the master bedroom soaked in human waste, suggesting Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Driven by their intuition that something sinister had occurred, the family pushed for a toxicology screening. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained a lethal concentration of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the active ingredient in common eye drops. Under police interrogation, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve by secretly spiking his water with eye drops. While she attempted to justify the act as revenge for alleged verbal and physical abuse, investigators and the family refuted her claims, noting that Steve was a gentle soul. It became clear that this was not a spur-of-the-moment act. Lana had methodically poisoned him over the course of 3 days, while he was too weak to seek help. Her true motive was financial. Without a will, she stood to inherit his entire fortune. In a final attempt to evade justice, Lana attempted to take her own life by turning on the gas in her home before her scheduled arrest. She survived, was treated, and was promptly taken into custody. In January 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, bringing an end to the calculated betrayal of a man who had loved her deeply. Here is the story, written as a seamless narrative. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and charismatic businessman who retired early at 41 to dedicate his life to mentoring others and supporting his family. In 2009, he met Lana Walsh, a quiet nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their opposing personalities, Steve being boisterous and outgoing, and Lana being a wallflower, Steve became deeply enamored, eventually marrying her in 2013. The couple settled into a beautiful lakefront forever home in South Carolina, where they seemed to be living an idyllic life. However, the dream turned into a nightmare in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious bouts of vertigo, nausea, and dizziness. Lana, acting as his primary caregiver, attributed his failing health to exhaustion and his pre-existing medical issues. On July 21st, 2018, tragedy struck when Lana reported finding Steve dead at the bottom of their staircase, with Lana claiming he had collapsed due to his vertigo. Initial responders believed he had suffered a natural heart attack. Steve's family, however, was deeply suspicious. When they arrived at the home, they were shocked to find a mattress heavily soiled with human waste, indicating that Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Furthermore, they found it highly uncharacteristic that the meticulous Steve had no will, and they were alarmed by how quickly Lana began disposing of his personal belongings and arranging for his immediate cremation, driven by their intuition that something sinister had occurred. The family successfully demanded an autopsy and toxicology testing. The results were chilling. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops. While colorless and tasteless, high doses of THC are deadly, causing a systemic shutdown of the central nervous system. When confronted, Lana initially claimed Steve had been abusive, attempting to paint herself as a victim. She eventually confessed to putting Visine in his water, feigning that she only wanted to cause him diarrhea as revenge for his alleged behavior. Investigators, however, determined that she had been poisoning him systematically over several days, leaving him to suffer alone. After a failed suicide attempt, Lana was arrested and charged. In January 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food items. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. While Lana insisted she never intended to kill Steve, prosecutors and the family maintained that the murder was a cold-blooded, premeditated act driven by financial greed, as Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire fortune in the absence of a will. Ultimately, a man known for his big heart and life of the party personality was stolen from his loved ones by the very person he trusted most. Here is the seamless narrative of the Steve Clayton case in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and boisterous businessman who served as the backbone of his family. After his father passed away, he stepped into the role of a father figure for his siblings, known for his kindness, humor, and willingness to mentor young entrepreneurs. After retiring at 41, he sought a partner who matched his intellectual and spiritual energy. He eventually met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. In 2013, the couple married and settled into a picturesque, custom-decorated home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina, where they appear to be living a blissful life. The tragedy began in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with recurring symptoms of vertigo, dizziness, and nausea. Lana, leveraging her status as a nurse, insisted that he simply needed bed rest and discouraged him from seeking outside medical attention. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of a staircase in their home. Initially, authorities ruled the death natural, suspecting a heart attack based on physical observations. However, Steve's family, particularly his sister Rosie, immediately sensed foul play. They were suspicious of Lana's behavior. She quickly arranged for his cremation, began liquidating his personal belongings, and claimed Steve had no will, a baffling detail for a man as financially meticulous as he was. When family members visited the home, they discovered the master mattress was heavily stained with human waste, indicating that Steve had been incapacitated, neglected, and suffering for days before his death. Driven by the family's insistence, the medical examiner performed a toxicology screen, which revealed a shocking truth. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops. When confronted, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve by repeatedly putting eye drops into his water. She attempted to justify the act as revenge for alleged verbal abuse, a claim vehemently denied by Steve's family and friends. Prosecutors and investigators concluded that the murder was a calculated, cold-blooded act driven by financial greed. Since Steve had no will, Lana stood to inherit his entire estate upon his death. Following a failed suicide attempt, Lana Clayton was arrested and ultimately pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food or drug products in 2020. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Steve Clayton's life was tragically stolen by a calculated betrayal, leaving his family to grapple with the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to helping others. Here is the seamless narrative summary of the story in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and vibrant businessman who retired early at 41 to focus on mentoring others and supporting his family. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse who seemed to be the perfect, quiet, and sweet partner he had been searching for. The couple moved into a beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, where life appeared idyllic for several years. In June 2018, however, Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. Lana, acting as his primary caregiver, claimed he was simply exhausted and suffering from chronic issues. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initially, local authorities suspected a natural death, such as a heart attack, as there were no signs of physical struggle at the scene. Steve's family, however, was deeply suspicious. They were troubled by Lana's hasty disposal of Steve's personal belongings. Her claim that he had left no will, contrary to his meticulous nature, and a disturbing state of the master bedroom, which showed signs of severe neglect. At the family's insistence, a toxicology screening was performed, revealing a shocking truth. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. This substance, which is tasteless and odorless, had effectively shut down his central nervous system, leading to his heart failure. When confronted by investigators, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve's water with eye drops over the course of several days. She attempted to justify her actions by alleging that Steve had been verbally and physically abusive, claiming she only wanted to make him sick as an act of revenge and never intended to kill him. Both prosecutors and Steve's family vehemently denied these claims of abuse, characterizing Lana's actions as a cold-blooded, premeditated murder motivated by financial gain. After a failed suicide attempt just before her arrest, Lana Clayton faced justice. In January 2020, she entered a plea deal, pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food or drug products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The case remains a harrowing reminder of how a calculated predator can hide behind a mask of normalcy, ultimately betraying the person who trusted her most. The story of Steve Clayton is a harrowing tragedy of betrayal and calculated murder at the hands of the person he trusted most. A successful, generous, and vibrant businessman, Steve thought he found his soulmate in Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. After their marriage and a move to a beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, life seemed idyllic until June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious symptoms of vertigo and nausea. The tragedy reached its breaking point on July 21st, 2018, when Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. While authorities initially suspected a natural death due to a possible heart attack, Steve's family was deeply suspicious. Their concerns were fueled by the discovery of a urine-soaked mattress, which indicated that Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days, as well as Lana's suspicious behavior in quickly clearing out his personal belongings and her claim that he had no will. Insisting on a deeper investigation, the family pushed for an autopsy and toxicology report, which revealed the shocking truth. Steve had lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the active ingredient in common eye drops, in his system. Under interrogation, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve by putting eye drops into his water. While she attempted to justify her actions by claiming she was retaliating against alleged physical and verbal abuse, her defense fell flat. Investigators determined that this was not an impulsive act, but a cold-blooded, methodical poisoning that had occurred over several days, rendering Steve too weak to help himself. Prosecution and family members believed the true motive was financial gain, as the absence of a will meant that Lana would inherit Steve's entire estate. After the crime was exposed, Lana attempted to commit suicide but failed. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drug items, and she was subsequently sentenced to 25 years in prison. The life of a man known for his kindness and warmth was cruelly stolen by the very person he had invited into his life, leaving behind a legacy of heartbreak for all who knew and loved him. Here is the story written in a seamless narrative flow in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and gregarious businessman who served as a rock and emotional anchor for his family. In 2013, he found what he believed to be his missing piece in Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. The couple eventually settled into a picturesque dream home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina, surrounded by family and friends. However, their seemingly idyllic life took a sinister turn in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell mysteriously ill, suffering from debilitating bouts of dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. Despite Lana's assurances that she was caring for him as a nurse, Steve's health continued to decline rapidly. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was discovered dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initial reports from the scene suggested a natural death, potentially a heart attack, as there were no immediate signs of a struggle. However, Steve's family was deeply suspicious. They knew Steve to be a meticulous man who would never have died intestate, yet Lana claimed there was no will. Furthermore, upon inspecting the master bedroom, the family was horrified to discover the mattress heavily soaked in human waste, indicating that Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Driven by these red flags, the family demanded an autopsy and toxicology screening. The results were chilling. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine, a substance that is odorless, colorless, and deadly when ingested. When confronted by detectives, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve's water with the eye drops, claiming it was an act of revenge for his alleged verbal and physical abuse. Investigators and those closest to Steve, however, rejected her claims of abuse, describing him instead as a gentle, kind-hearted soul. They concluded that, as a nurse, Lana understood the lethal potential of the substance and had methodically poisoned him over several days to ensure his death. The prosecution maintained that the true motive was greed. Without a will, Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire fortune. After an unsuccessful suicide attempt, Lana was arrested. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tamper with a food product, ultimately receiving a 25-year prison sentence. Steve Clayton's life was cut short by a calculated betrayal, and it was only through the relentless persistence of his family that the truth was uncovered, preventing a cold-blooded murderer from evading justice. Would you like me to focus on any specific aspect of this case, such as the forensic evidence or the legal outcome, in more detail? Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and devoted businessman who retired at 41 to focus on mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his family. Known for his larger-than-life personality and boisterous spirit, Steve seemed to have found his missing piece in 2009 when he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their personality differences, Steve being gregarious and Lana being a quiet wallflower, they married in November 2013 and eventually settled into a picturesque dream home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina. The idyllic life they built began to unravel in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. Although Lana was a nurse, she claimed he was merely exhausted and insisted on bed rest. Tragically, on July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of their grand staircase. Responding officers and the coroner initially attributed his death to natural causes, specifically a heart attack, as Lana insisted he had been struggling with illness for days. However, Steve's family, particularly his sister Rosie, was deeply suspicious. They found it impossible to believe that a man as meticulous as Steve, a former finance professional, would not have a will. Furthermore, when they visited the home, they discovered the mattress was soaked in human waste, suggesting Steve had been incapacitated and suffering in neglect for days, contradicting Lana's claims that she was providing attentive care. Driven by these inconsistencies, the family demanded an autopsy and a toxicology screening. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. THZ is odorless, colorless, and tasteless, making a lethal weapon when ingested, under pressure from investigators. Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve by adding the eye drops to his water, while she attempted to justify her actions by claiming Steve was verbally and physically abusive. His friends and family vehemently denied these allegations, noting that Steve was a gentle and kind soul. Investigators concluded that Lana's true motive was financial gain. Without a will, she stood to inherit Steve's entire estate. After a failed suicide attempt as police closed in, Lana was arrested. In January 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, ending the life of a man whose generosity and laughter had left a lasting mark on everyone who knew him, and exposing the calculated cold-bloodedness of a woman who had abused her medical knowledge to commit murder. Here is the seamless narrative version of the story in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and charismatic businessman known for his larger-than-life personality and deep devotion to his family. After years of searching for a partner who could match his intellectual and emotional depth, he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Their life together seemed idyllic, especially after they moved into their forever home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina, where they surrounded themselves with family, friends, and pets. However, in June 2018, the dream began to unravel. Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating vertigo, nausea, and exhaustion. As a nurse, Lana took charge of his care, keeping him better than at home. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initial assessments by the coroner suggested a natural death, likely a heart attack, given his recent health struggles. Suspicion, however, quickly took hold among Steve's family. They found it impossible to believe that Steve, a meticulous accountant, would have left no will. Their concerns deepened when they discovered the couple's mattress was heavily soiled with human waste, suggesting Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Furthermore, Lana moved with alarming speed to cremate his body and clear out his personal belongings. Prompted by the family's insistence, the medical examiner performed a toxicology screen, which yielded a shocking result. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. When ingested, this substance acts as a potent poison, constricting blood vessels and leading to cardiac arrest. Confronted with the evidence, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve, claiming she had been a victim of his verbal and physical abuse and only intended to make him ill as revenge. However, those who knew Steve, a man remembered as a gentle, men-alike figure, vehemently denied these accusations. Investigators concluded the poisoning was a calculated, methodical act motivated by greed, as Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire estate in the absence of a will. After a failed suicide attempt just before her arrest, Lana Clayton was taken into custody. In 2020, she accepted a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drugs. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, bringing an end to a cold-blooded betrayal that almost passed as a natural tragedy. Would you like to explore more details about the legal proceedings? Or are you interested in the forensic science behind how such a common item like eye drops can be used as a weapon? Here is the seamless, continuous narrative of the case in English. Stephen Clayton was a successful, generous, and big-hearted businessman who served as the backbone of his family. After retiring at 41, he dedicated his time to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his loved ones. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. To all outward appearances, the couple lived an idyllic life in their beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, filled with affection and family gatherings. However, in July 2018, Stephen's life came to a tragic and suspicious end. The nightmare began when Stephen suddenly fell ill with debilitating dizziness, nausea, and exhaustion. Despite his deteriorating state, Lana, a trained nurse, did not seek medical help, claiming he was simply suffering from vertigo. When police arrived at their home on July 21st, 2018, following a 911 call, they found Stephen dead at the bottom of a staircase. Lana insisted it was a tragic accident, and initially, the coroner attributed his death to natural causes, possibly a heart attack, as there were no outward signs of a struggle. However, Stephen's family became deeply suspicious. They discovered the mattress in the master bedroom was soaked with human waste, indicating that Stephen had been lying helpless and incapacitated for days without proper care. Furthermore, Lana's bizarre behavior, such as disposing of Stephen's personal belongings immediately and claiming he had left no will, despite his known meticulous nature, raised major red flags. Driven by their intuition, the family successfully insisted on an autopsy and toxicology screening. The results were shocking. Stephen's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the active ingredient found in over-the-counter eye drops. Faced with the forensic evidence, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Stephen's water with the eye drops, while she claimed she only intended to make him ill as revenge for alleged verbal and physical abuse, a claim his family vehemently denies. Investigators concluded that the motive was cold-blooded financial gain. Without a will, Stephen's substantial estate would have legally defaulted to Lana upon his death. After an unsuccessful suicide attempt, when she learned police were closing in, Lana was arrested. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, ending the story of how a trusted spouse became a calculated killer. Here is a story of Steve Clayton written in a seamless, cohesive narrative. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous businessman, known to his family and friends as a vibrant, boisterous, and deeply loving man. After retiring at 41, he dedicated his life to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his close-knit family. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior, whom he believed was his soulmate. The couple moved to a beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, where life appeared idyllic. However, in June 2018, Steve suddenly began suffering from mysterious bouts of dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. As a nurse, Lana took charge of his care, but his condition deteriorated rapidly. On July 21, 2018, Steve was discovered dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initially, authorities and the coroner suspected a natural death, possibly a heart attack or an accident caused by his vertigo. However, Steve's sister Rosie and other family members were deeply suspicious. They were disturbed by the condition of Steve's bedroom, specifically a mattress soaked with human waste, which was entirely inconsistent with Steve's meticulous nature. Driven by the gut feeling that something sinister had occurred, the family demanded a full autopsy and toxicology report. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. When ingested, the substance shuts down the central nervous system and can cause fatal cardiac events. Facing the evidence, Lana eventually confessed to detectives that she had been poisoning Steve by secretly putting eye drops into his water. She attempted to justify her actions by claiming that Steve was verbally and physically abusive, painting herself as a victim seeking revenge. However, Steve's friends and family vehemently rejected her claims, describing him as a gentle soul and labeling her accusations as a calculated attempt to smear his character and avoid a harsher sentence. Prosecutors argued that Lana, using her medical knowledge, had methodically poisoned Steve over several days, leaving him incapacitated and unable to seek help. After a failed suicide attempt, Lana was taken into custody. In January 2020, she accepted a plea deal, admitting to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. While the motive was widely believed to be financial gain, as Steve's lack of will would have left his entire estate to her, the true legacy of the case remains the senseless theft of a beloved man's life, leaving his family to grapple with the betrayal of someone they had once welcomed into their hearts. Here is the story of Stephen Clayton written as a seamless narrative in English. The story of Stephen Clayton is a chilling tragedy of betrayal and a testament to the power of a family's intuition. Steve was a successful, generous businessman who retired at 41. Known for his boisterous personality, his role as a father figure to his siblings, and his unwavering love for his family. After years of searching for a partner who matched his intellect and spirit, he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their contrasting personalities, Steve being gregarious and Lana being quiet and reserved, the couple fell in love, married in 2013, and eventually settled into a beautiful, postcard-perfect home on the banks of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. The tragedy began in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating vertigo, nausea, and dizziness. Lana, acting as his primary caregiver, tended to him at home, telling worried family members that he was simply exhausted. On July 21, 2018, the nightmare culminated when Steve was found dead at the bottom of their staircase. Lana claimed that his vertigo had caused him to fall and die of natural causes. In the immediate aftermath, she acted with suspicious haste. She arranged for his cremation, claimed he had no will, and began clearing out his personal belongings, including his clothes and jewelry, even before his memorial service had concluded. Steve's family, however, knew him as a meticulous, health-conscious man who was never without his phone and was essentially a clean freak. The inconsistencies in Lana's story and her cold behavior led the family to suspect foul play. Refusing to accept the coroner's initial suggestion of a heart attack, they demanded an autopsy and a toxicology report. The results were shocking. Steve's system contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine. Faced with the forensic evidence, Lana eventually confessed to detectives that she had been poisoning Steve's water with eye drops because she was angry, though she maintained that she never intended for him to die. Investigator, however, uncovered a much darker reality. Steve had been systematically poisoned over several days, leaving him too weak to call for help while trapped in a home that had become a scene of filth and neglect. Prosecutors argued the motive was clear: financial gain. With no will, Lana stood to inherit everything. In 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product, receiving a 25-year prison sentence. Ultimately, it was the persistence of Steve's family that uncovered the truth, ensuring that what could have been a perfect crime instead became pursuit of justice for a life stolen by a calculated betrayal. The story of Steve Clayton is a tragic account of betrayal and a cold-blooded murder hidden behind the facade of a happy marriage. Steve was a successful, generous, and boisterous businessman who deeply loved his family and was known for his gregarious personality. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a quiet, unassuming nurse whom he believed to be his perfect match. However, the couple's move to a lakefront home in South Carolina marked the beginning of a sinister end. In July 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initially, Lana claimed he had suffered from vertigo and died of a natural heart attack, a story that authorities were initially inclined to believe given the lack of signs of a struggle. Suspicion, however, quickly mounted among Steve's family members. They discovered that the mattress in the master bedroom was soaked with human waste, which was entirely inconsistent with the behavior of a man as meticulous as Steve. Furthermore, within days of his death, Lana began liquidating Steve's assets and personal belongings, and she claimed that he had died without a will, a scenario that defied logic for a man of his financial background. Driven by these red flags, the family demanded an autopsy and toxicology screening, which ultimately exposed the truth. Steve had been poisoned with lethal doses of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common eye drops. As a nurse, Lana possessed the medical knowledge to understand that ingesting large quantities of eye drops would cause nausea, dizziness, and eventually total failure of the central nervous system. When confronted, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve's water, alleging that he was abusive and that she was merely seeking revenge. This claim was vehemently rejected by those who knew Steve, who described him as a gentle and kind soul. Investigators concluded that rather than a crime of passion, this was a calculated act of murder motivated by financial gain. In January 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Steve Clayton was a man who lived his life to help others, yet his life was stolen from him by the very person who had vowed to care for him. Here is a story written as a continuous narrative in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and vibrant businessman who was widely adored by his family and friends. After retiring early at age 41, he dedicated his life to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his loved ones. In 2009, his life changed when he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their starkly different personalities, Steve being boisterous and outgoing, and Lana appearing quiet and reserved, Steve believed he had found his soulmate. The couple married in 2013 and eventually moved into a beautiful, picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina. The tragedy began in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with symptoms of vertigo, nausea, and dizziness. Lana, leveraging her professional background as a nurse, insisted that Steve was simply exhausted and required bed rest, effectively isolating him. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was discovered dead at the bottom of the staircase in their home. While authorities initially suspected a natural death from a heart attack, Steve's family was deeply suspicious from the start. They were horrified to find the couple's mattress soaked in human waste, a condition completely inconsistent with Steve's notoriously clean and meticulous nature. Furthermore, Lana's behavior, immediately disposing of Steve's belongings and claiming there was no will, raised further red flags. Driven by the family's insistence, investigators ordered an autopsy and toxicology report. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine. THZ is colorless, odorless, and tasteless, making it a lethal weapon when ingested in large quantities. Confronted with the evidence, Lana initially attempted to smear Steve's character by alleging he was abusive, but she eventually confessed to poisoning his water with the eye drops. She had even attempted suicide shortly before her arrest. In January 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drug products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Steve's family and prosecutors maintained that her claims of abuse were a fabrication intended to justify a cold-blooded murder motivated by financial gain. Steve Clayton's life was tragically cut short by the person he trusted most, leaving behind a legacy of generosity and warmth that continues to be remembered by all who knew him. This is a story of a man whose life was defined by the warmth he brought to others, a story that begins not with an ending, but with a vibrant, booming greeting. Hello, hello, hello. That was the signature rhythm of Steve Clayton, a man whose presence was as large as his heart. He was a successful and generous businessman, a person who had spent his life building up those around him. Along his journey, he met a nurse who possessed a heart that seemed, at first glance, to be as grand as his own. She struck everyone as being very quiet, but very sweet and very nice. It was not long before Steve fell head over heels. He could not hide the feelings he had for her. He was very much in love with her. But as the pages of time turned and a sickness consumed their marriage, those who loved them simply knew that there was something very wrong. Money, success, and status are no protection against the currents of fate. This is not a natural death, but rather a story of a life extinguished too soon, and the journey to uncover the truth behind it. Welcome. Tonight we celebrate the joining of two wonderful people. It is March 10th, 2007 in Miami. It is a big day for the bride, Rosemary Clayton, and her family. She is finally marrying her love, William Leslie. That is the oldest brother of the bride, 52-year-old Steve Clayton, proudly walking her down the aisle. 11 months prior to the wedding, they had lost their father. Rosemary asked her brother if he would step in. Of course, there were a lot of tears. She could not imagine anybody else standing in place for her father. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? I do in the memory of my father. It was sentimental to be gathered at something so special, where their father was not present. With their father passing, the brother of Rosemary, Steve, was now the head of the family, and though he had never had children of his own, he had always been a father figure to his siblings. When the father and mother of Steve were married, Steve was just about 2 or 3 years old. He had 4 sisters, and Rosemary was the youngest. He was 10 years older than her. So there really was not a moment when Steve was not in the life of his sister. Steve was her big brother, and he was her hero. He was everything a little girl would want in a big brother. He played football, he wrestled in high school, and so that really made him bigger than life for her. After high school, Steve graduated college with a degree in finance and quickly matured into a shrewd businessman. Steve, with a partner, started a company called Physical Therapy Resources. That eventually became a national company with physical therapy centers all over the country. Steve and Rosemary met at work. He was in a hospital, and she was in the same hospital, and that is how they met and became friends. He was very successful and eventually sold his interest in his business, and basically from that point on, he was retired. His goal was to retire at the age of 40. He missed it by 1 year. He retired when he was 41. Selling his business freed up Steve to do whatever he wanted, and what he wanted to do was give back. He would mentor such a large group of young men, helping them start up a business, or helping them find out what direction they wanted their life to go. Steve was extremely generous with not only his resources, but with his time. And Steve always had time for his family. Rosemary filmed as Steve teased their Uncle Max. It is special. Their dad was not so funny. He was more serious. Serious, much more serious. He was always serious. But where did that money come from? Steve? I do not know. And when his sister Rosemary got married, it was a good humor of Steve that made him the life and soul of the occasion. Please get up, Steve. Plate. Steve was always the first guy to get up to give a toast anywhere. Hello, hello, hello. It was always ad-lib for him, from the heart. This is my way of, getting away from the emotional stuff. William, thank you so much. I am not going to look at you. Thank you so much for making my sister so happy. And my dad. Steve was never one to hide his emotions. My dad told me before he passed to take care of my sister, to honor you, and he loved you very much. I have to get serious here. All right, I am cool. All right, you guys are great companions. You are great partners. And my sister, I have never seen her happier. After the speeches, Steve stepped up for the father-daughter dance. He came up, and they got ready to dance. And before the music started, they had a very, very powerful moment. A surprise recording of their dearly departed father played out. The best moment of my day was when you were climbing my knee. You would say, "Daddy, I love you." I miss those days, I really do, because I love you too. He had so many duties that day. He was a father figure. He was the best man. He was the entertainment. He was the one that kept everyone calm, kept everyone laughing. He was a natural at it. Despite his success and close network of family and friends, the own romantic life of Steve had been rocky. He looked for a partner that was as focused and determined and loving and caring as he was. And that is a tall order to fill. Now 52, his family figure would take a very special person to sweep him off his feet. I think Steve was always looking for somebody on a level he could connect with emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. But 3 years later, that is exactly what happened. In late 2009, Steve decided to leave his home state of Florida for a change of pace in North Carolina. He really loved being physical. He loved walking. He loved anything to do with being outdoors. So when he moved from South Florida to North Carolina, he had the opportunity to be outdoors a lot more. Within just a few months, Steve announced that he had met someone special. He seemed to have a glow that he had been missing for a little while, and he was excited. Her name was Lana Walsh. 12 years his junior. She was a nurse who grew up in Oklahoma. She struck the family as being very sweet, very quiet, but very sweet. And this quiet kind of stood out because Steve was not very quiet. The personality of Steve was gigantic. She was more like a wallflower. Despite their differences, Steve was sure she was the one. They were very affectionate with each other, always arm in arm. Steve was always hugging her, squeezing her, kissing her. I felt happy for my brother. So, of course, anybody that he loved, I was going to embrace. It was not long before Steve asked Lana to move in with him. After they got to know each other quite a bit more, Steve persuaded her to come to Charlotte. And, Steve could be very convincing, and they added some new additions to the family. The first dog that Steve and Lana got was Guinness, an Italian greyhound. They loved the breed, and so they decided that they wanted another one, and her name was Sadie. With Lana, Steve finally felt he had found his missing piece. Steve always had great things to say about her. He referred to her as his Lana Sue. He could not hide the feelings he had for her. He was very much in love with her. I think Steve found himself well grounded with Lana. I felt like Steve found a certain sense of peace with her. Steve Clayton came to North Carolina for a change from his old life and found a whole new future. When Steve Clayton danced with his sister at her wedding, he dreamed of finding his own special someone, and now, 6 years later, he was about to marry the love of his life, a Veterans Affairs nurse named Lana Walsh. It was a lovely day in November 2013. Many of the family had traveled to North Carolina just to be there and enjoy that day with him, and he made it very special for everyone. The wedding of Lana and Steve took place at their house in Charlotte. It was such a beautiful event. You could just see the love. Just beaming both of them were. Soon after, the couple decided to relocate and move into their forever home, just over the border in South Carolina, on the banks of Lake Wiley. It was like something on a postcard. This gorgeous ocean blue home, sitting on a gorgeous piece of lakefront property. It was very lovely. The couple set about refurbishing their new home, decorating it with a collection of artworks and antiques that Steve possessed. Steve was the kind of person for whom objects were very personal, and he was very proud of his possessions. They were all unique in some way. The move allowed the couple to indulge in their love of nature. So, if there was something fun and outdoors to do, he was going to be the first one there, and he was gung-ho about it. Their relocation to South Carolina also meant the pair were closer to the extended family of Steve. I married the niece of Steve in 2010, so I officially became his nephew. We hung out with Steve and Lana a lot when they moved up here. We would go out to dinner with them. We would go to concerts. We would go to special events every holiday. They were also just a 30-minute drive from the son and grandchildren of Lana, and the pair never said no to a bit of babysitting. Steve had a way with children because Steve had always been a child at heart. So he was the kind of guy that got down on the floor and played with the kids. Pop goes the weasel. And with the kids around, there was never a dull moment in the Clayton household. Here, Lana filmed Steve attempting to describe the limbo while her twin granddaughters watched. We will make Papa do it. So there's a stick, and I have to go like that, and I have to go under the stick, and I have to get real low to get under the stick. It is a game. It is a dance. These are dances. You have to tell me how to act it out. Lana was tickled, but the twins were more interested in their ice cream. Steve enjoyed playing all kinds of games, whether it was Scrabble or even a silly child's game. You want to get in, do you not? You do you not? Just spin the spinner, and then turn the handles many times. 2, and put your head in the thing. Put your chin on the thing. Okay, A, E, D, F, spin it forward. Both of them, or one, both of them. Steve was a huge teddy bear. They loved to play with him. He always had kids hanging on him. What number did you get? 3. And Lana was always game for some fun, too. Oh, no, it is coming. It is coming up. It does it every time. Here it comes. Here it comes. Cheers. 5 years into their marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be thriving. But in June 2018, Steve suddenly fell ill. He said he felt dizzy, complaining of vertigo. He said that his ear hurt and that he felt nauseous, and he started getting sick in the yard. And I felt real bad for him. I knew that he had had issues with vertigo prior to this. He said he had been very ill and did not know exactly what was wrong. He just remembered that he was working out in the garden, and he started to feel dizzy, a little nauseous, a little dizzy, headache, and he thought that maybe he had gotten sunstroke. You okay? Yeah. As a nurse, Lana thought the best thing for Steve was bed rest. He said he remembered laying down, and he said the next time he opened his eyes, 36 hours had passed. Worried, Rosemary called Lana to see if she could explain the mystery illness of Steve. I asked her what she thought was going on, because that is very odd for any person of any age to lose 36 hours of time. And she said that he was fine and that she was watching him, and she was making sure he was okay. Though he had never been ill like this before, Lana thought that Steve was just exhausted. I felt reassured that Lana was there to take care of him in any way that she could, especially with her knowledge as a nurse. It seemed the larger-than-life energy of Steve was starting to catch up with him. But just 2 weeks later, it appeared the treatment of Lana had worked. Steve was back to his old self, throwing a party for the 4th of July. That party was just as great as every other party they had been to there. Steve was his normal affectionate self. Everybody had a great time. Here is Steve dancing with Lana as they celebrated in style. He grabbed Lana right away, and we just kind of followed suit and all joined in. I remember watching them hug and him kiss her, and they were completely in love. Things were good at the Clayton home, and no one doubted that the lives of Lana and Steve were going to be happy and long. On July 21st, 2018, a call came into the York County 911. Police units arrived on the scene, and body camera footage recorded by the responding officer, Sergeant Day, captured what they found. As they walked into the front door, there was Steve right at the bottom of this grand staircase. And unfortunately, at that point, he was gone. He was dead. You could hear him kind of whispering and talking in low voices. That was because Lana Clayton was just around the corner, distraught and crying. So they did not want to say anything that was disturbing to her. So she said she left the next day. Did not put anything, just his wife and family. Sergeant Day needed to talk with the wife of Steve, Lana, to find out what had happened. Ma'am, I am Sergeant Day. I am going to be here for just a little while until the coroner gets here and transporting those things. Oh no, ma'am. I am just fine. It feels good to me to stand if I am not making you uncomfortable. Lana told Sergeant Day that Steve had been suffering dizziness for 2 days. Stephen had been very ill with vertigo. She had found him Thursday morning, that he stood up, got very dizzy and collapsed, that she had to help him upstairs, and since that time he had not been back downstairs. Miss Clayton, you were outside. You were working outside? I was mowing the lawn real quick, and when I came in, I fell down. I am so sorry. I tried to take a blanket underneath me, but I could not. Despite her training, Lana was unable to render aid to Steve. That is when she, I think, really panicked because she knew she could not do anything further to help him. And so she immediately ran out when she heard the motorcycle coming by to wave someone down to call 911. The nephew, Nick French, was on duty as a police officer when he got the news. My mom called and she said, Uncle Steve died, and, just kind of disbelief. I mean, I knew it was for real, but, it did not really sink in, so I got down there as quick as I could. I just remember the whole time going through my head was, how? Why? The phone rang, and I saw that it was my nephew calling. He said, Uncle Steve died. Uncle Steve died. That was not possible. It was not possible. How could he be gone? No, I cannot believe it. With Rosemary 700 miles away, Nick and his family rallied around Lana. I felt awful because I knew she loved Uncle Steve, and I just kept thinking, I am upset right now, but I cannot imagine what she is going through. To find her husband, on the ground like this. Lana feared the vertigo of Steve could have caused a fall